Wealth, power, privilege. Three words that often walk hand in hand with another: arrogance. In the glittering penthouses high above the bustling streets of Manhattan, there exists a world few of us will ever truly know. A world where fortunes are made and lost over breakfast, where private jets are called upon with the same casualness as we might order an Uber, where the boundaries between what's possible and impossible blur into insignificance. This is the story of Alexander Blackwood, heir to the Blackwood tech empire and a man whose net worth exceeded $20 billion before his 30th birthday. A man who had never heard the word no his entire life. A man who viewed the world as little more than his personal playground. And this is the story of Sarah Mitchell, a 26-year-old waitress working double shifts at an upscale Manhattan restaurant, carrying the weight of student loans, dreams deferred, and a resilience that couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. Their worlds were never meant to collide, and yet they did. Because of a dare. A childish, cruel game played among the elite, with real people's lives as pawns. But what began as a heartless wager would evolve into something neither of them could have anticipated. A journey that would strip a billionaire of his armor, bring him literally to his knees, and remind us all that the most valuable things in life cannot be purchased, no matter how vast your fortune. Welcome to a true story of power and humility, of cruelty and redemption, of the games people play, and the unexpected ways they can transform us. My name is the channel host, and today I invite you to witness how the mighty can fall, not into ruin, but into humanity. Seat 1. The billionaire's world, Alexander Blackwood, was born into privilege so extreme it bordered on fantasy. The only son of tech visionary Richard Blackwood, Alexander never knew a moment of financial insecurity. His childhood bedroom was larger than most people's entire homes. His first car, at 16, was a custom Lamborghini. By 21, he was already sitting on the board of Blackwood Tech, with a corner office overlooking Central Park. At 32, Alexander wasn't just wealthy, he was powerful. His signature could alter stock markets. His opinions shaped technological trends. His dating life made tabloid headlines, but perhaps the most dangerous element of Alexander's existence wasn't his wealth or influence, it was the people he surrounded himself with. His inner circle consisted exclusively of fellow heirs and heiresses, tech prodigies who had made their own billions before 30, and the occasional celebrity seeking to expand their brand. They called themselves the Pantheon, a private joke referring to themselves as modern-day gods. They dined at restaurants that wouldn't open for another 6 months to the public. They vacationed on private islands. They grew bored easily and entertained themselves with increasingly expensive and, at times, morally questionable pursuits. It was a Friday evening in early autumn when the incident occurred. The Pantheon had gathered at Elysium, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants, where reservations were rumored to require both connections and a minimum net worth. In the private dining room, with its handcrafted crystal chandeliers and vintage champagne flowing freely, 6 billionaires found themselves growing restless. They had discussed their latest acquisitions, compared their recent excursions to space. 3 of them had already made the journey, and were now seeking something, anything, to break the monotony of their privileged existence. "I'm bored," announced Vanessa Winters, a tech heiress whose social media empire had earned her a spot on the Forbes list by 25. "Let's play a game." The suggestion lit up the room. The Pantheon loved games, particularly the kind with stakes high enough to give even them a slight rush of adrenaline. "What did you have in mind?" Alexander leaned forward, his custom Tom Ford suit catching the light. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass, his blue eyes calculating yet somehow empty, the eyes of someone who had never known genuine struggle. Truth or dare? Vanessa replied with a smirk. But with our own twist. The rules were simple yet cruel. Each dare had to involve someone outside their circle, someone ordinary. The stakes were set at $5 million. Accept and complete. The dare, win the money. Refuse or fail, pay the pot. As the dares circled the table, they grew increasingly outrageous. One billionaire was dared to buy out an entire Broadway show and demand the actors perform only for him, in reverse order. Another was challenged to purchase a renowned art gallery and replace every masterpiece with selfies. Then it was Alexander's turn, and Vanessa's eyes gleamed with mischief as they landed on their waitress, Sarah Mitchell, who was carefully placing another bottle of Cristal in an ice bucket. "I dare you," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with entitlement, "to hire that waitress as your personal assistant for 6 months. But here's the twist. You have to make her fall in love with you, then fire her publicly at the Blackwood Charity Gala." The table fell silent. Even among the pantheon, this crossed a line. They played with material things, with experiences, with status, not human emotions. Alexander's eyes narrowed as he studied Sarah. She was undeniably beautiful, but in an understated way that would never normally capture his attention. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her uniform was immaculate. She carried herself with a quiet dignity that seemed out of place among the excessive displays of wealth surrounding her. "That's actually disgusting, Vanessa," said Julian Reeves, a tech investor whose ruthlessness in business somehow didn't extend to personal cruelty. But Alexander didn't see a human being with hopes and dreams. He saw a challenge, a diversion, and his pride wouldn't allow him to back down. "Done," he said, emptying his champagne flute. "Easiest $5 million I'll ever make." What Alexander didn't know as he approached Sarah with his business card and an offer that seemed too good to be true, a position as his personal assistant with a salary that could eliminate her student debt within a year, was that this moment would mark the beginning of his unraveling. He didn't know that Sarah Mitchell wasn't just any waitress. He didn't know about her double major in business and computer science, completed while working full-time. He didn't know about the startup she was quietly building in her precious few hours off. He didn't know about the steel beneath her polite smile. He didn't know that in attempting to break someone else, he would end up breaking himself open instead. Sarah Mitchell's day had started like any other, early. The 5:30 a.m. alarm that gave her just enough time to check her startup's code before heading to her first shift at a downtown coffee shop, followed by classes at the community college where she was taking additional business courses. And finally, her evening shift at Elysium. Sarah wasn't just working for survival, she was working toward something. Her startup, SecureShare, was a cybersecurity platform designed to protect small businesses from the kind of attacks that usually only major corporations could defend against. She believed that everyone deserved protection, not just those who could afford premium services. The irony that she was serving people who would never understand her daily reality wasn't lost on her. But Sarah wasn't bitter, she was determined. Every champagne bottle she opened for customers who didn't even glance at the price was another step toward her own dreams. So when Alexander Blackwood approached her with that signature confidence, bordering on arrogance, she initially dismissed his offer as a joke. "You want to hire me as your personal assistant?" she repeated, her expression carefully neutral despite her disbelief. "Mr. Blackwood, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not qualified." "But I disagree," Alexander interrupted, unused to anyone questioning his decisions. "I've been watching you tonight. You're efficient, attentive to detail, and you clearly know how to deal with difficult personalities." He gestured toward his friends. "The starting salary is $150,000 with performance bonuses. Full benefits, of course." Sarah's mind raced. That kind of money could clear her student loans in months, not years. It could provide the seed funding her startup desperately needed. It could change everything. But something didn't add up. Why? Me? She asked directly. There are thousands of qualified assistants in New York with impressive resumes and experience working with executives. Alexander wasn't used to being questioned, but he was an experienced enough liar to have an answer. Ready. I trust my instincts, he said smoothly. They've made me billions, and right now they're telling me you're exactly what I'm looking for. What he didn't say was that he'd chosen her precisely because she seemed intelligent enough to do the job adequately, but ultimately dispensable, someone whose feelings he could toy with and discard without any consequences to his world. Sarah hesitated, every practical bone in her body screaming that this was too good to be true. But the pragmatic part of her brain, the part that had been calculating exactly how many years it would take to clear her debt and fund her startup, silenced those doubts. When would you want me to start? She asked. Alexander's smile didn't reach his eyes. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. sharp. He handed her a business card with an address embossed in subtle silver on heavy cream cardstock. The Blackwood Building. Ask for me at reception. And just like that, Sarah Mitchell's life changed course. She gave her notice at Elysium that very night, ignoring the knowing looks from her co-workers who had seen this scenario before. Wealthy men plucking pretty waitresses from their stations only to discard them. Within weeks, but Sarah wasn't going into this naively. She knew there was something off about the offer. No one hired staff without interviews, background checks, or at least a resume review, yet the opportunity was too significant to pass up. She would be careful, vigilant, and most importantly, she would never lose sight of her own goals. What she couldn't have known was that across the city, in a penthouse overlooking the glittering skyline, Alexander was already plotting how to execute his dare. The Blackwood Charity Gala was 5 months and 28 days away. Just under 6 months to make a waitress fall in love with him, then shatter her publicly. To him, it was just a game. $5 million he didn't need versus his pride, which he valued above all else. The Blackwood Building dominated the Manhattan skyline, 88 floors of gleaming glass and steel, a monument to capitalism and the tech empire that had made the family name synonymous with innovation and wealth. Sarah arrived at 8:30 a.m., dressed in the most professional outfit she owned, a simple navy blazer over a white blouse and tailored pants she'd splurged on for job interviews. Her stomach was a knot of nerves, but her expression revealed nothing as she approached the imposing reception desk in the vast marble lobby. Sarah Mitchell for Alexander Blackwood, she stated calmly, though her heart was racing. The receptionist's perfectly shaped eyebrow arched slightly, the only indication of surprise that Mr. Blackwood would be meeting with someone dressed so ordinarily. Of course, take the executive elevator to the 88th floor. Mr. Blackwood's office is directly ahead when you exit. Sarah had never been in an elevator that moved so quickly or silently, nor had she ever been in one completely alone. Apparently, very few people had clearance for the executive floor. As the numbers climbed higher, so did her anxiety. What was she walking into? The doors opened silently to reveal a minimalist reception area decorated in shades of white, grey, and black. The woman seated at the desk had the polished appearance of someone who earned more than most doctors. Miss Mitchell. It wasn't a question. Mr. Blackwood is expecting you. This way, please. Alexander's office was larger than Sarah's entire apartment. 3 of the walls were glass, offering a panoramic view of the city below. The 4th featured a massive abstract painting that probably cost more than Sarah would earn in her new position over several years. The man himself stood with his back to her, looking out over his domain. "You're early," he said without turning. "I appreciate punctuality." When he finally faced her, Sarah was struck by how different he appeared in his natural environment. At the restaurant, he'd been merely another wealthy patron. Here, surrounded by the trappings of his empire, Alexander Blackwood radiated power in a way that was almost physical. "I've had your employment contract prepared," he continued, gesturing to a thick document on his obscenely large desk. "Review and sign it today. Marion will show you to your office afterward and brief you on your responsibilities." Sarah stepped forward, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. "I have an office." Alexander looked almost amused. "Did you expect to work from the hallway? You'll be handling confidential information, arranging my schedule, coordinating with our global offices. Of course you have an office. It's adjacent to mine." The contract was comprehensive and, to Sarah's shock, even more generous than he'd initially indicated. Besides the substantial base salary, there were performance bonuses, stock options, health benefits that covered everything from routine checkups to experimental treatments, and a housing allowance that could move her from her cramped studio to a decent one-bedroom in a safe neighborhood. It was more than fair. It was life-changing, which only intensified Sarah's suspicion. "Why?" she asked again, looking up from the contract. "Why me? And please don't say your instincts. No one makes business decisions this significant on instinct alone." For a fraction of a second, something like respect flickered across Alexander's features. Most people were so dazzled by his wealth and power that they never questioned him. This waitress had done so twice in less than 24 hours. "Let's call it an experiment," he replied cryptically. "I'm tired of being surrounded by people who look and think exactly like me. I want a different perspective, someone who sees the world from a completely different angle." It wasn't entirely a lie. Alexander was indeed conducting an experiment, just not the kind that would benefit Sarah. She studied him for a long moment, then signed the contract. Whatever game he was playing, she decided she could play it too. She would take his money, build her contacts, learn everything she could about the business world from the inside, and emerge stronger. If he had ulterior motives, well, so did she. "Welcome to Blackwood Tech, Ms. Mitchell," Alexander said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Let's see what you're made of." Neither of them could have predicted just how thoroughly that statement would be tested. Alexander's plan was simple: assign Sarah increasingly difficult tasks until she either failed spectacularly or succeeded just enough to keep her position. He would gradually increase their personal interactions, charm her as he had countless women before, and ensure she was emotionally dependent on him by the time the gala arrived. What he hadn't counted on was Sarah Mitchell herself. On her first day, Marion, Alexander's executive administrator, who oversaw all his personal staff, handed Sarah a seemingly impossible task: organize 5 years' worth of unsorted digital files from Alexander's private projects, create a logical indexing system, and complete it by the end of the week. Mr. Blackwood fired the last 3 assistants for failing to properly organize his work, Marion informed her with thinly veiled satisfaction. "He's very particular." Sarah recognized the test for what it was. Rather than panicking, she stayed until midnight, familiarizing herself with the chaotic collection of documents, communications, and project notes. By the 3rd day, she had not only organized everything, but had created a custom algorithm that could automatically sort new files as they came in. When she demonstrated the system to Alexander, expecting at least mild approval, she was met, instead, with narrowed eyes. "Where did you learn to code like that?" he asked sharply. Sarah hesitated only briefly. "Computer science was half of my double major. I've been coding since high school." "And you were working as a waitress?" The disbelief in his voice was tinged with something else, the first genuine curiosity he'd felt toward her. "Student loans don't pay themselves," Sarah replied simply, "and the restaurant industry pays better than entry-level tech positions, when you account for tips." After that, the tasks grew more complex. Alexander claimed it was to test her capabilities, but in reality, he was trying to find her breaking point. He sent her to sit in on negotiations with a difficult client when his usual team was unavailable. Instead of failing, Sarah spotted a clause in the contract that would have cost Blackwood Tech millions and quietly alerted Alexander to it during a break. He assigned her to coordinate a last-minute press conference after a minor security breach, expecting her to crumble under the pressure. Instead, she worked through the night with the PR team, helping craft a message that not only addressed the issue, but turned it into a positive story about Blackwood Tech's transparency and commitment to security. Week after week, Sarah exceeded every expectation, not because she was trying to impress Alexander, though he assumed that was her motivation, but because each task taught her something valuable about running a major corporation, knowledge she intended to apply to her own venture someday. What Alexander failed to realize was that in attempting to set Sarah up for failure, he was actually giving her a crash course in corporate leadership that would have taken years to acquire otherwise. The dynamic between them shifted subtly. Alexander found himself actually listening to her suggestions during meetings. He began asking for her opinion on projects, initially as another test, but increasingly because her perspective often revealed angles he and his yes-men had overlooked. For her part, Sarah maintained a professional distance, never forgetting that this opportunity had fallen into her lap too easily. She used her evenings and weekends to continue developing SecureShare, applying what she learned each day at Blackwood Tech to refine her business model. But something unexpected was happening to Alexander. For the first time in years, he was intellectually challenged on a daily basis. Sarah didn't hesitate to point out flaws in his thinking when she saw them, always respectfully, but without the fear that characterized most of his interactions. The problem with surrounding yourself only with people who are afraid to contradict you, she told him one evening as they worked late on a presentation, is that you miss out on ideas that could be better than your own. Alexander had stared at her for a long moment before asking, "And you're not afraid to contradict me?" Sarah had simply shrugged. "You can fire me any time. I survived before this job, and I'll survive after it. That gives me freedom to be honest." Her answer disturbed him more than he cared to admit. Everyone in his life, from his board members to his so-called friends, measured their words carefully, always calculating the potential benefit or harm to their own interests. Sarah's straightforward approach was so foreign, it almost felt like a different language. As weeks turned into months, Alexander found himself inventing reasons to keep Sarah close. Meetings that didn't require his personal assistant somehow became critical for her to attend. Business trips suddenly needed her coordination on-site rather than from New York. His calendar mysteriously opened up for one-on-one working lunches to discuss her progress. The Pantheon noticed the changes in their friend. Alexander had always been driven and focused, but now he seemed genuinely engaged in his work in a way they hadn't seen before. He declined their invitations more frequently, claiming pressing business matters. "She's just a waitress," Vanessa reminded him during a rare appearance at one of their gatherings. "Don't get distracted from the end game." But Alexander was already distracted, though not in the way Vanessa implied. It wasn't romantic interest that kept him spellbound. It was the uncomfortable realization that Sarah Mitchell, with her practical education, real-world experience, and unfiltered perspective, might actually understand certain aspects of humanity and business better than he did, despite his Ivy League pedigree and billions, and that was a thought more terrifying than he could admit, even to himself. 3 months into her employment, Sarah received an unexpected directive from Alexander: clear his schedule for the weekend and pack a bag for herself. They would be flying to Seattle to tour a struggling startup Blackwood Tech was considering acquiring. The trip marked a turning point, confined together on his private jet, then sharing working dinners and long strategy sessions in the hotel's conference room. The professional walls between them began to thin. It was during their final dinner in Seattle, at a small, unassuming restaurant Sarah had suggested instead of the Michelin-starred establishment Alexander had initially chosen, that the facade began to crack. "Why this place?" Alexander asked, looking around at the family-owned establishment with its mismatched chairs and walls covered in photos of local customers. "Because their food is incredible, and because places like this matter," Sarah replied. "Small businesses are the backbone of actual communities. Not every meal needs to be an exercise in exclusivity." Alexander wanted to dismiss her perspective as naive, but the genuine warmth with which the owners greeted their regular customers gave him pause. When was the last time anyone had been genuinely happy to see him rather than his money or influence? The conversation over dinner veered away from the acquisition and into unexpected territory. Sarah asked about his childhood, and to his own surprise, Alexander found himself speaking honestly about the isolation of extreme wealth, the pressure of legacy, the emptiness of accomplishments that came too easily. "Don't get me wrong," he said, swirling the wine in his glass. "I'm not complaining about privilege, but imagine never knowing if you've actually earned anything in your life, if your accomplishments are your own or just the expected outcome of your circumstances." Sarah studied him thoughtfully. "So prove it to yourself. Do something that has nothing to do with your name or your money, something where those advantages don't help you." "Like what?" Alexander challenged, genuinely curious about her answer. "I don't know. Learn a craft that requires physical skill. Volunteer somewhere anonymously. Write something without publishing it under your name. The specifics don't matter. What matters is that you'd know the achievement was yours alone." The idea lingered with Alexander long after they returned to New York. He found himself watching Sarah more closely, not for signs of the infatuation he was supposed to be cultivating, but for insights into how she navigated a world that had never handed her anything. He observed her taking night calls with small business owners who used her startup's beta security protocols, patiently walking them through updates. He noticed how she treated everyone in the building with the same respect, from the cleaning staff to board members. He saw her resilience when projects hit obstacles, her willingness to admit mistakes and learn from them. Slowly, uncomfortably, Alexander began to recognize the emptiness of his own existence in comparison. The friends who were more like accessories, the achievements that had been all but assured from birth, the relationships based entirely on mutual benefit rather than genuine connection. Almost without realizing it, he began making changes. He started attending product development meetings he'd previously delegated. He surprised his engineering team by asking detailed questions about user experience for their lowest-tier customers. He even, to Sarah's visible shock, began learning to code, not because he needed the skill, but because he wanted to understand the foundation of his own company better. "What's happening to you?" Vanessa demanded during a tense lunch, after Alexander had declined to participate in their latest game, buying and closing a beloved local bookstore to build yet another luxury boutique none of them needed. "You've become boring, predictable. Is this about the bet? Because if you need more time, the bet." Alexander had almost forgotten about it. The Blackwood Charity Gala was now just 6 weeks away, and he had made virtually no progress toward his supposed goal of making Sarah fall in love with him. Instead, something far more dangerous had occurred. He had begun to respect her. "The bet's off," he told Vanessa flatly. It was childish from the start. Vanessa's perfectly sculpted features hardened. "That's not how this works. You accepted the dare. 5 million if you succeed, 5 million to the pot if you fail or back out." "Then I'll pay," Alexander replied, reaching for his wallet with deliberate casualness. "Would you prefer a check or a wire transfer. But Vanessa's wounded pride wouldn't be soothed so easily. It's not about the money. It's about commitment, following through, or have you gone soft because of some waitress? Alexander felt a surge of anger so intense it momentarily darkened his vision. Her name is Sarah Mitchell. She's the most competent person I've ever hired, and twice as intelligent as anyone at this table, myself included. I'd appreciate it if you spoke about her with respect. The silence that followed was absolute. In their decade-long friendship, Alexander had never spoken to Vanessa or any of the Pantheon with such cold fury. Alexander stood, dropping several $100 bills on the table. I need to get back to work. Real work, not whatever this is. He gestured vaguely at their gathering. I'll send the $5 million today. As he walked away, Vanessa called after him. She's changed you, Alexander, and not for the better. He didn't bother responding because for the first time, he recognized Vanessa's assessment for what it was, the desperate defense of someone who feared genuine growth because it threatened the status quo. What Alexander didn't know was that his conversation had been overheard by a server who had previously worked with Sarah at Elysium. By that evening, the entire truth of the dare and Alexander's apparent withdrawal from it was making its way to Sarah's phone through a series of increasingly urgent text messages from her former co-worker. The betrayal cut deeper than Sarah could have anticipated. Not because she had harbored romantic feelings for Alexander, she hadn't allowed herself that vulnerability, but because she had begun to believe he was more than the entitled billionaire she'd initially judged him to be. She had seen glimpses of a person worth knowing beneath the wealth and privilege. Now she knew those glimpses had been illusions, convenient masks worn by a man playing a game with her life, a game she hadn't even known she was part of. That night, Sarah did something she hadn't done since her father's death years earlier. She cried herself to sleep, mourning not a love lost, but the death of a potential that had never been real. Next morning, she arrived at work earlier than usual, placed a resignation letter on Alexander's desk, packed her personal items, and walked out of the Blackwood building without looking back. Alexander arrived at his office to find Sarah's access card and a single sheet of paper on his desk. The resignation letter was brief, professional, and gave no indication of what. She knew. It simply stated that she was leaving effective immediately and wished the company continued success. His first reaction was confusion, then anger at the unprofessional departure. He tried calling her cell phone but found it had been disconnected. Her company email was already disabled per standard security protocol for departing employees. It was Marion who finally enlightened him, her usually impassive face showing traces of genuine disappointment. Ms. Mitchell learned about the dare. Mr. Blackwood, she said quietly, placing a tabloid on his desk with the headline, Blackwood Billionaire's Cruel Bet. Waitress was just a game. How? Alexander began, but the question died as he scanned the article. The details were too specific to be fabrication. Someone in the Pantheon had leaked the story, complete with quotes from the original dinner where the dare had been proposed. The article portrayed Sarah sympathetically, a hard-working woman manipulated by the elite for their amusement. Alexander was painted as exactly what he had been, callous, entitled, and cruel. Fix this, he ordered his PR team when they assembled in his office an hour later. Whatever it costs. We can't, sir, his communications director said bluntly. This isn't a corporate scandal we can spin. This is you, personally, behaving in a way that validates every negative stereotype about the ultra-wealthy. The story's gone viral. Our Blackwood bet is trending. People are boycotting our products. Then pay her, Alexander said desperately. Offer her whatever she wants to make a statement that it was all a misunderstanding. The look his team exchanged spoke volumes. We tried that approach already, his legal counsel admitted. Ms. Mitchell declined to speak with us. In fact, her exact words were, "There isn't enough money in Mr. Blackwood's accounts to buy my cooperation in whitewashing his character." For the first time in his adult life, Alexander Blackwood felt truly powerless. He had built his identity around the belief that wealth could solve any problem, smooth any conflict, open any door. But Sarah Mitchell had just slammed a door in his face that no amount of money could reopen. The following days were a blur of crisis management meetings, board calls questioning his judgment, and a growing personal realization that Vanessa had been right about one thing. Sarah had changed him. Not by falling in love with him as the dare had intended, but by holding up a mirror to his life that revealed just how hollow it had become. He thought about their conversations, about her suggestion that he do something his wealth couldn't influence. Sarah herself had been that something, a person whose respect couldn't be purchased, whose good opinion had to be earned through character, not currency, and he had failed spectacularly. A week after Sarah's departure, Alexander made a decision that shocked his board, his friends, and the business world at large. He announced he was taking a temporary leave from his position as CEO of Blackwood Tech to address personal matters. What those personal matters entailed, he told no one. He simply disappeared from public view, his penthouse sitting empty, his private jet grounded, his seat at the Pantheon's table conspicuously vacant. In reality, Alexander was living in a modest apartment in Brooklyn under his mother's maiden name, experiencing for the first time what it meant to exist without the cushion of extraordinary wealth. He cooked his own meals, often burning them. He took the subway, getting lost more than once. He shopped at regular grocery stores, stunned by the actual effort involved in planning and preparing food. He even attempted to fix a leaking faucet, flooding his bathroom in the process. Each failure, each moment of frustration, each small humiliation taught him something he had never had to learn: resilience, the ability to confront his own incompetence without shame, the skill of trying again after failing. But his most important project remained elusive: finding Sarah to make amends. Her previous apartment had been vacated. Her friends from Elysium protected her fiercely, refusing to give him any information. Her startup Secure Share had gone dark online following the scandal. Alexander was beginning to lose hope when a chance encounter changed everything. While volunteering at a technology workshop for underprivileged teens, something he had begun doing to fill his days with meaning, he overheard a student mention a new cybersecurity program their community center had received as a donation. "The lady who made it comes every Thursday to teach us how to use it," the teen was saying. "She's awesome. Used to work for some rich dude, but quit when he turned out to be a jerk." Alexander's heart raced as he casually asked more questions, confirming his suspicions. Sarah was volunteering her time and technology at community centers throughout the city, focusing on areas where small businesses couldn't afford proper cybersecurity. That Thursday, Alexander waited outside the community center, his stomach in knots. When Sarah finally emerged from the building, she stopped dead at the sight of him. She looked different. Her hair was shorter. She was dressed more confidently, but her eyes still held that same intelligence and dignity that had first caught his attention. "Please don't run," he said quickly. "Just give me 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Sarah regarded him coolly. "Why should I give you anything? Because I need to apologize, and because you deserve to hear it." Alexander took a deep breath. "I was cruel and thoughtless. I treated your life like a game piece. There's no excuse for what I did." "You're right. There isn't," Sarah agreed, but she didn't walk away. "Is that all?" "No," Alexander admitted. "I also want to thank you." This visibly surprised her. "Thank me? For what?" "For showing me who I was and who I could be instead." You changed everything, Sarah. Not in the way that stupid dare intended, but in a way that actually mattered. You made me see myself clearly, for the first time. Sarah studied him skeptically. And who are you now, Alexander? Another billionaire having a temporary attack of conscience before returning to business as usual. Her words stung, because they articulated his own deepest fear, that this transformation wasn't permanent, that he would eventually slide back into old patterns of entitlement and isolation. I don't know who I am yet, he answered truthfully. I'm still figuring that out, but I know who I don't want to be anymore. Something in his honesty must have reached her because Sarah's expression softened fractionally. What do you want from me, Alexander? Forgiveness? Absolution? Neither, he said quietly. Those have to be earned, not requested. What I want is a chance to make amends, not with money or influence, but with actions. Sarah was silent for a long moment before responding. SecureShare is struggling since the scandal. Your name being associated with it, even negatively, has scared off potential clients. My work at these community centers is the only way I can still pursue my mission of making cybersecurity accessible to everyone. Alexander felt a fresh wave of shame, knowing his actions had damaged not just her pride, but her life's work. Let me help. Not with money, he added quickly, seeing her expression. Arden. With time, with effort, with whatever skills I have that might be useful. You want to volunteer? Sarah couldn't hide her skepticism. You're offering to work for free, helping small businesses that can never benefit you in any way? Yes, Alexander said simply, for as long as it takes. Sarah shook her head in disbelief. Meet me here next Thursday at 4 p.m. Wear clothes you don't mind getting dirty. If you're even 5 minutes late, don't bother coming at all. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was an opportunity. More than he deserved and exactly what he needed. Alexander arrived at the community center 30 minutes early the following Thursday, dressed in jeans and a plain t-shirt. For the next month, he showed up reliably each week, doing whatever was asked of him without complaint. He carried boxes of equipment. He set up computers. He answered phones. He even cleaned bathrooms when the regular maintenance person called. In sick, no task was beneath him because, for the first time, Alexander understood that the measure of work wasn't who performed it, but the purpose it served. Sarah remained professionally cordial, but emotionally distant, watching his efforts. With guarded interest, she didn't trust his transformation, and Alexander couldn't blame her. Words were easy. Sustained action was the only currency she valued. Gradually, Alexander expanded his involvement, volunteering additional days at different centers. He leveraged his technological knowledge to enhance Sarah's security programs, always careful. To seek her approval before implementing any changes, he listened more than he spoke during strategy meetings, learning from community organizers who had been serving their neighborhoods for decades. 2 months into his unofficial apprenticeship, with SecureShare, Alexander faced his greatest test. The Blackwood Charity Gala, the very event where he had planned to publicly humiliate Sarah, was approaching, and the board insisted on his attendance despite his leave of absence. I can't go, he told Sarah after their volunteer shift, explaining the situation. It feels wrong, celebrating philanthropy when the whole event reminds me of who I was planning to be that night. Sarah considered this, then surprised him with her response. I think you should go. Why? Alexander asked, genuinely confused. Because running from your past doesn't prove you've changed, she said simply. Facing it does. Alexander attended the gala, but not as everyone expected. He arrived without an entourage, dressed in a simple suit rather than his usual custom tuxedo. When called upon to give his traditional speech, he approached the podium with uncharacteristic humility. For years, I've stood on stages like this one, speaking about giving back while understanding nothing about genuine service, he began, causing a ripple of surprise through the audience. I believed that writing checks was enough, that philanthropy was about the wealthy bestowing favor upon the less fortunate. He paused, gathering courage for what came next. Alexander took a deep breath. I was cruel and thoughtless. I treated your life like a game piece. There's no excuse for what I did. You're right, there isn't, Sarah agreed, but she didn't walk away. Is that all? No, Alexander admitted. I also want to thank you. This visibly surprised her. Thank me? For what? For showing me who I was and who I could be instead. You changed everything, Sarah. Not in the way that stupid dare intended, but in a way that actually mattered. You made me see myself clearly. For the first time, Sarah studied him skeptically. And who are you now, Alexander? Another billionaire having a temporary attack of conscience before returning to business as usual. Her words stung because they articulated his own deepest fear, that this transformation wasn't permanent, that he would eventually slide back into old patterns of entitlement and isolation. I don't know who I am yet, he answered truthfully. I'm still figuring that out, but I know who I don't want to be anymore. Something in his honesty must have reached her because Sarah's expression softened fractionally. What do you want from me, Alexander? Forgiveness? Absolution? Neither, he said quietly. Those have to be earned, not requested. What I want is a chance to make amends, not with money or influence, but with actions. Sarah was silent for a long moment before responding. SecureShare is struggling since the scandal. Your name being associated with it even negatively has scared off potential clients. My work at these community centers is the only way I can still pursue my mission of making cybersecurity accessible to everyone. Alexander felt a fresh wave of shame, knowing his actions had damaged not just her pride, but her life's work. Let me help, not with money, he added quickly, seeing her expression. Harden. With time, with effort, with whatever skills I have that might be useful. You want to volunteer? Sarah couldn't hide her skepticism. You're offering to work for free, helping small businesses that can never benefit you in any way? Yes, Alexander said simply, for as long as it takes. Sarah shook her head in disbelief. Meet me here next Thursday at 4 p.m. Wear clothes you don't mind getting dirty. If you're even 5 minutes late, don't bother coming at all. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was an opportunity. More than he deserved, and exactly what he needed. Alexander arrived at the community center 30 minutes early the following Thursday, dressed in jeans and a plain t-shirt. For the next month, he showed up reliably each week, doing whatever was asked of him without complaint. He carried boxes of equipment. He set up computers. He answered phones. He even cleaned bathrooms when the regular maintenance person called. In sick, no task was beneath him because, for the first time, Alexander understood that the measure of work wasn't who performed it, but the purpose it served. Sarah remained professionally cordial, but emotionally distant, watching his efforts. With guarded interest, she didn't trust his transformation, and Alexander couldn't blame her. Words were easy. Sustained action was the only currency she valued. Gradually, Alexander expanded his involvement, volunteering additional days at different centers. He leveraged his technological knowledge to enhance Sarah's security programs, always careful, to seek her approval before implementing any changes. He listened more than he spoke during strategy meetings, learning from community organizers who had been serving their neighborhoods for decades. 2 months into his unofficial apprenticeship. With SecureShare, Alexander faced his greatest test. The Blackwood Charity Gala, the very event where he had planned to publicly humiliate Sarah, was approaching, and the board insisted on his attendance despite his leave of absence. I can't go, he told Sarah after their volunteer shift, explaining the situation. It feels wrong, celebrating philanthropy, when the whole event reminds me of who I was planning to be that night. Sarah considered this, then surprised him with her response. I think you should go. Why? Alexander asked, genuinely confused. Because running from your past doesn't prove you've changed, she said simply. Facing it does. Alexander attended the gala, but not as everyone expected. He arrived without an entourage, dressed in a simple suit rather than his usual custom tuxedo. When called upon to give his traditional speech, he approached the podium with uncharacteristic humility. For years, I've stood on stages like this one speaking about giving back while understanding nothing about genuine service, he began, causing a ripple of surprise through the audience. I believed that writing checks was enough. That philanthropy was about the wealthy bestowing favor upon the less fortunate. He paused, gathering courage for what came next. I was wrong, profoundly, embarrassingly wrong. Real change doesn't come from throwing money at problems from a safe distance. It comes from working alongside people, learning from them, serving their vision rather than imposing your own. As discomfort visibly spread through the crowd of wealthy donors, Alexander continued, many of you read about a bet I made regarding a woman who worked for me. What those stories didn't capture was that my cruelty was not an aberration, but a symptom of a life built around privilege, without purpose, wealth without wisdom. The room had fallen completely silent now, hundreds of eyes fixed on him in shock or embarrassment as they recognized aspects of themselves in his confession. I can't undo what I did, but I can be honest about who I was and commit publicly to becoming someone different, someone better. Starting tonight, I'm announcing the restructuring of the Blackwood Foundation. In the future, our giving will be directed by community leaders who understand the actual needs of the people we aim to serve. Our success will be measured not by how much we give, but by how much we learn, how deeply we engage, and how effectively we amplify the work already being done by those with far fewer resources but far greater insight. As Alexander left the stage to confused applause, he felt a weight lifting. He had expected his public confession to be excruciating, but instead it was liberating. For the first time, he had spoken a truth that cost him something, the comfortable fiction of his own benevolence, instead of words calculated for advantage. What he didn't know was that Sarah had decided to attend the gala after all, standing quietly at the back of the room, witnessing his unexpected moment of genuine vulnerability. She slipped out before he could see her, but something had shifted in her perception of him. A week later, after their usual volunteer session, Sarah finally asked the question that had been brewing since his speech. Why are you really doing this, Alexander? All of it? The volunteering, the speech, this new version of yourself you're trying to become? Alexander considered the question carefully. At first it was guilt. Then it became about winning your forgiveness. But now he hesitated, searching for the right words. Now it's because this is the first time in my life I've felt like I'm becoming someone I might actually respect. Sarah studied him for a long moment. I believe you, she said finally, and that terrifies me. Why? Because it would be easier if you were still the villain in this story. If this was all an elaborate performance to salvage your reputation. I understand that version of you. I know how to protect myself from him. She shook her head slightly. I don't know what to do with the Alexander Blackwood who's actually trying to be decent. You don't have to do anything, Alexander said, quietly. I'm not expecting anything from you, Sarah. I'm just grateful you